The British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, often referred to as the BCATP, was an agreement signed in Ottawa on December 17, 1939, soon after World War II began. The agreement was signed by the governments of Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The instruction scheme was centered in Canada, which provided infrastructure and a pool of potential trainees, as well as paying the lion's share of the costs. The planned schools in Canada graduated 131,553 personnel, 72,835 of them homegrown Canadians. Almost half the total pilots and aircrew employed on British and Commonwealth flying operations during the war were graduates of the plan. President Franklin D. Roosevelt called Canada the aerodrome of democracy. Relative to population, the Prairie Provinces made an enormous overall contribution to the BCATP. Saskatchewan Air Schools trained 20% of the pilots and 30% of some other categories of aircrew. Two of the four training command headquarters were situated in the Prairie Provinces, number 2 in Winnipeg and number 4 in Regina. The region was well suited to flight training because of the climate and terrain. Pilot factories were heavily concentrated in the southern parts of Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, where there were 13 elementary flying training schools, 20 service flying training schools. Saskatchewan had some 50 schools, bases, and training facilities of various kinds. Saskatchewan alone trained 1/5 of all BCATP pilots and as much as 30% of some other categories of air crews. By the end of the Second World War, the BCATP had produced 131,553 aircrew, including pilots, wireless operators, air gunners, and navigators for the air forces of Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. There was also a women's division, of which 17,038 women proudly wore its uniform before the service was abolished on December 11, 1946. In Saskatchewan, there were 20 training facilities in major cities and smaller outlying communities. Trainees began their military career at a manning depot where they learned to bathe, shave, shine boots, polish buttons, maintain their uniforms, and otherwise behave in the required manner. There were 2 hours of physical education every day and instruction in marching, rifle drill, foot drill, saluting, and other military routines. Remedial high school education was offered to bring 17 and 18-year-old trainees up to the Royal Canadian Air Force academic level. There was also a standard aptitude test, the Royal Canadian Air Force classification test. After 4 or 5 weeks, a selection committee decided whether the trainee would be placed in the aircrew or ground crew stream. Aircrew, wireless gunner candidates went directly to a wireless school. Air observer and pilot aircrew candidates went on to an initial training school. Pilot and air observer candidates began their 26 or 28-week training program with 4 weeks at an initial training school. They studied theoretical subjects and were subjected to a variety of tests. Theoretical studies including navigation, theory of flight, meteorology, duties of an officer, Air Force administration, algebra, and trigonometry. Tests included an interview with a psychiatrist, the 4-hour-long M2 physical examination, a session in a decompression chamber, and a test flight in a Link trainer, as well as other academics. At the end of the course, the postings were announced. An elementary flying training school gave trainees a 50-hour basic flying course, instruction on simple trainer like the de Havilland, Tiger Moth, Fleet Finch, or Fairchild Cornell took place over 8 weeks. Elementary schools were operated by civilian flying clubs under contract to the Royal Canadian Air Force, and most of the instructors were civilian. The training path for air observers, or later to become known as navigators, began after the 8 weeks of initial training at an air observer school. This included 1 month at a bombing and gunnery school, and finally 1 month at a navigational school. The bombing and gunnery school offered instruction in the techniques of bomb aiming and aerial machine gunnery to air observers, bomb aimers, and wireless air gunners. These schools required large areas to accommodate their bombing and gunnery ranges and were often located near water. The Avro Anson, Ferry Battle, Bristol Bolingbroke, and Weston Lysander were the standard aircraft used at bombing and gunnery schools. The flight engineer was the member of a heavy bomber air crew responsible for monitoring the fuel, electrical systems, and engines. He also controlled throttle settings and was the pilot's assistant. Flight engineers were not co-pilots, but they had some flying training and were expected to be able to take over the controls in the event the pilot was killed or disabled.